welcome back to another tutorial with the Essentials Club. If you are new around here, I am Maddie and welcome. Today we are going to be diving into making the most adorable dress. I know a lot of you in the Northern Hemisphere are going into your winter, but we in Australia are about to go into summer, so I'm going to be making the most ultimate summer essential dress that I can wear around to all the festivities coming up. In case you guys haven't realized yet, I'm a little obsessed with shirring. So the bottom of this dress is going to be a shirred skirt section with a ruffled bottom, and then this gathered front with the tie section, some elastic straps which then go into a puffy sleeve, kind of similar to this. So you'll need the following to make your own dress. I'll put the amount you need per size in the below description for the amount of material. I'm actually using a secondhand doona that I got from a garage sale for free. Don't worry, I've washed it multiple times in the hot wash. So if making your own handmade and unique garments isn't enough of a reason for you to get into sewing, being able to make something pretty much for free should be enough of a reason as well. For this style of dress, I would suggest something not too stiff, so as always something like a cotton or a linen will be ideal. We'll then also need some elastic shirring thread, which we will then put onto a bobbin. We'll also need just some matching thread and a general bobbin thread for the material. We need some pins as well as a safety pin. And then we'll also need some elastic. We need enough to go around our waist area and around our strap area, and then maybe one section in the back. I'm actually going to have a thicker elastic for this strap section and then a thinner elastic for the waist area. So if you want to do that as well, maybe keep that in mind. We'll also need a measuring tape, some scissors. I've just got regular fabric scissors as well as pinking shears just to keep the edges nice and clean. And then we'll need our trusty old sewing machine. So let's jump into making our own summer essential dress. We are going to find the measurements that we'll be working with for the skirt section. So for this we'll need to find our widest point, obviously to make sure that the skirt part fits over that, and then also the length that we want from this. Grab your measuring tape, wrap it all the way around your waist or your butt area or whatever you find to be the widest area, and pull it to a point so it's kind of a little bit tight but not too much that you can't move it at all. Once you've found this, we're going to add on 8 inches. So that's your full circumference of your widest point. For me that was 41 inches, and then I added 8 inches, and that is 2 inches for seam allowance, and then the extra 6 inches to get it to a point where it's larger, so when we add the shirring it bunches it in. Once we've found that full width plus that 8 inches, we will then halve it, and that is going to be the cutting width for one panel. So write that number down as your cutting width. And then for the height of the skirt section, we're going to measure from just under our bra line, as that's where the skirt will stop, down to where you want it to finish. So obviously if you want it to be quite mini, measure to there. If you want it to be like knee length, you can measure down to there. And then we're going to add 2 inches to that measurement that we then find. I'm lucky enough that this bedding has a ruffled section on the bottom, so I don't need to add that on. If you just want to go completely shirring to the bottom, that's totally fine, so just stick with that measurement. Otherwise, if you want to add on a ruffled section, just make sure that you allow for seam allowance and more bunched up section to add on. Also, an easy hack to add a little bunched up section, which might not be as dramatic as this, is to just stop the shirring about 4 to 5 inches from the bottom section, and naturally it'll just create a little ruffled section, and all you'll need to do is hem it. So those are 2 little hacks that you can get around at creating this style. If you're not sure how to add on a ruffle, I will link a video below that shows just a quick overview of creating a gathered section and how to add that on. We're then going to cut out 2 panels at these measurements, so that will be the front panel and the back panel, and then we should be up to where I am. Now that I've got these 2 panels, I'm just going to face them good sides facing. Lucky enough, this is actually a double-sided doona, so each of my panels are going to be double-sided, which if you've got a lightweight linen or cotton and you know it's going to be see-through, it might be a good idea to double it up like this. So I've just laid them down so that the side edges are all aligned. I'm now just going to pin down one side, pin down the other side, and just sew them, and then we'll flip them out to reveal it with the good side. Now that we've sewn down these 2 side seams, we're going to flip it so the good sides reveal themselves now. And then what we should have is a very oversized skirt section. So if you're worried at all about sizing, maybe just slip it over your hips and your butt area just to make sure that it fits oversized there. And then we are now onto the shirring section. Grab our shirring thread and we're going to add that onto the bobbin. And we have to do this by hand because the key with shirring thread is it's obviously elastic, so it's going to bunch up this area for us. But we need it to not be stretched as we put it on there. And if we just use the normal setting on the machine to add the shirring thread onto the bobbin section, it'll actually stretch it out as you do it, and we don't want that. I pop it in just through the little hole section if you have that on there. Grab a hold of it and then just lightly start to wrap the shirring thread around the bobbin section. We're not adding any stretch, so make sure you don't stretch it. Just pretty much wrap it around with no pull if you can, and keep doing that until it's pretty much full. We're then just going to replace the bobbin section with this now shirring thread, and we'll leave that top thread just as a normal thread. I know this can be a section where some people have quite a bit of trouble when it comes to shirring, so normally after the first line or two you might not even see any effect, but as you start to go down the whole way and you still see no bunching, you might need to play around with the tension. Normally a tighter tension helps this bunch more, so maybe play around with that. If you're worried again about spaces not being even, this might be a good time to grab some fabric chalk or a pencil or something and just evenly mark out lines that you want to sew. But essentially we're just going to sew the whole circumference of this skirt section line by line with the shirring until we get down to the point that we want to stop. For me, I'm going to do wider spread lines, so probably about 1 inch each, because I know it will be too time consuming doing any more. I'm going to leave about 1 inch from the top as well, so that leaves enough seam allowance to add it onto the top section when we get to that. Otherwise, I'm just going to go for it and do each line. To save thread, I tend to just finish a line, do my back stitch at the beginning and the end, and then just move on to the next one rather than trimming the thread, pulling it out, and then restarting a whole new line. Also, because it is a thicker thread on the bobbin section, it probably won't make it through the whole shirring section all in one go, so you might need to take it out and rethread it a few times to get through this, so that can be a bit time consuming as well. That's why I've normally thread up a couple so that when I'm in the zone of sewing, I can just keep in track with that and just replace it as I go. Right, so time to get through the shirring section and then I'll meet you on the other side. Now that we've got through the shirring section, it is now time to put aside the skirt and we're instead going to focus on the top. It's essentially going to be this boob tube section with the straps and the sleeves then added onto it. For the height, we'll need to figure out where we want it to start. So for me, I've got this top as a reference, otherwise mid-chest is a good area. And then go down to pretty much where we started the measurement for the skirt. For me that was 8 inches, so I'm now going to add 4 inches, and that's enough for seam allowance and to create some tunnels for the elastic and the little tie pieces that we're going to put in there, and that will be your cutting height of the panel. Then to find the cutting width, pop it the whole way around our chest area, making sure again that it's not too tight and that we can kind of shuffle it around. Once we find that number, we'll then add on 10 inches, and that allows enough seam allowance and extra space for it to gather in and give it this oversized effect up the top. We will then halve it, so those will be our key measurements that we need. Just a side note as well, if you notice that your material is quite see-through, you might want to double up these sections. So use those measurements to cut out one panel, then use this first one that you cut out as a template and lay it on the fabric, and then cut out a second square, but make this one 1 inch longer. And the reason we do that is because we then fold it in half long ways and cut it down the middle, as this is going to be the center part and be a cute little feature area. Now what we should have is this one big back panel and then the 2 front panels halved, and we're just going to start joining them at the side seams. So I'm just going to grab one of the shorter panels and lay it good sides facing on this back panel and align this side edge. At this point you should figure out which side you want to be the top and the bottom. Maybe just put a pin in place so you can remember which side you're deciding to be the top. And the reason that we figure that out is when we sew down this side seam, we're going to stop 3 inches from that top point. So I'm just going to focus on this first one, and then I'm going to repeat it for the second panel in the front, and then also going to do it down the center front seam. Now that we have joined it down the side seams and that center seam and made sure to stop at least 3 inches from that top edge, what we should end up is this little boob tube section with these open flappy bits at the top. So we're going to focus on the very closed section, which will be our bottom section, and we're going to create a tunnel for our elastic to go. So grab your elastic, put it around your under bra area or that rib section, wrap it around there and cut it with at least 2 inches seam allowance, and that will then be ready to use when we need it. In the meantime, we're going to create a tunnel to thread this through. We're just going to do a simple 1/4 inch fold around here to create a clean hemline. And then we're going to do another larger fold, which will be big enough to thread this through. Let's focus on this first hem. So fold it by 1/4 inch with the bad sides all facing out, all the way around this bottom edge, which is the edge that we sewed straight to the edge to for those seams. And once we've pinned it in place, we just sew there, and then we'll meet back here to do the larger hem to add the elastic in. So once we've done that smaller hem, we're now going to fold it over enough to allow space for the elastic to go through. When you fold this hem over, it might be a good idea to place the elastic on top of it so you can double check that the amount allowed is enough, and make sure that you at least leave a 1/2 inch extra on there so that we can attach this top section to the bottom. Once you've figured that out, pin it in place and then go sew the whole way around that area and stop about 2 inches from where you started sewing, and that will be the section where we insert the elastic into this tunnel. Next, we're going to pop a safety pin onto the end of the elastic and into this tunnel and push it around. I find it easy if you just push the safety pin through the fabric, bunch it up and then pull it through again, and then continue to do that all the way around until you reach that little open hole again. Take off the safety pin and then overlap that extra seam allowance that we allowed. Switch your machine to the zigzag setting and sew this so it's secure in place, and then just sew close that section that we left open. So now we have this elastic waist section. I'm going to switch the machine back to the normal stitch and just go around and do that small hem all the way around this top edge now. Of course, we've got these dipped open edges, so you can just pin it in place and do it in sections if you prefer that. Say if you're a beginner, that might be a good option. Otherwise, I just kind of went for it and folded it as I went and did it all in one long go, which I find easiest personally. But essentially just fold it so there's about 1/4 inch hem going around this whole top edge, so it's got a nice clean finish. And what we should end up with is, it's almost looking like a weird extra mini skirt, but that elastic waist will sit down there attached to the skirt, and this top section we're going to add more elastic and a drawstring in, so it too will be all nice and bunched up at the top. So let's focus first on this backside, as that's the easiest. Our backside should just be the one larger panel that doesn't have the cut in the middle, and same as what we did before, we're just going to fold it big enough so that we can fit the elastic in. This elastic is only going to go across our back section, so just cut it so that it feels secure on there, so it's not too tight, but I'm sure whatever that ends up being will probably be a little bit smaller than this designated area. Make sure to add at least 1 inch once you've found that length, and then cut the elastic to that. Again, we're just going to fold over this back section, making sure that you've got enough space for the elastic to go in there. Pin that in place. We're then just going to sew one line from edge to edge, and then I'll show you how to thread through the elastic. Once again, we're going to grab the safety pin and pop it on the end of the elastic. As we've created this tunnel in this section that has 2 open ends, we're just going to thread it through one side and push it all the way along until this very end of the elastic meets the end of the fabric. I've now pulled it through so it sits on the very edge of that material, if not just a little bit inset from it. And I'll pop a pin just to secure it in place there, and we're just going to just sew a line down that edge section so that it holds that edge of the elastic in place and keeps it nice and secure and it doesn't pop out from there. We'll then continue using that safety pin to push the other edge to the other side. Once we've got it out there, we can unpin it from this. Maybe make sure it's not twisting along there, that's all nice and straight. And then again, just push it through so that it is sitting pretty much flush with the edge of the fabric. Just sew this edge of the tunnel closed and at the same time secure the elastic in there. Instead of putting elastic on these front sides, we're actually going to put a drawstring that ties at the front. That's why we've left this little front section split open. So at a bare minimum, we know it needs to at least be the length of this. I would ideally like it to be double the length, so then once it's drawn in, it's got a bit of like a cute oversized tie section. What I've done is I've measured that, I've doubled it, and it happened to be the amount that I had left over in a scrap section, so I've utilized that. Each piece was about 2 inches wide. So now that when I fold it in half with the seam allowance, it'll probably end up being about 1/2 inch. If you wanted to be more specific with the width of your tie strap section, whatever the final width you want it to be, double that and then add 1 inch seam allowance. So for example, if you wanted this to be thicker and about 1 inch, at its final folded width, you would double that and get that to 2 inches, and then add an inch for seam allowance, and 3 inches would be your cutting width. So now that I have cut them out, I then folded them in good sides facing and sewed as close as I could to that raw edge, one short edge, one long edge, and then left that other edge open. And then what I'll do next is I will grab a small paintbrush. If you have something thin or that can push the ends out of this, secure it on this closed end and kind of pull it over itself, and use that paintbrush to push it all the way out so then the good sides are showing. Do that again for the second piece. Now we should have 2 straps all ready to add in. We're going to now create a tunnel to add it through on the top. So these are the 2 short edges at the front, and we're just going to fold them so that they're wide enough for this to stick through. So again, you can just pop it on top to make sure that you allow enough room. And a good idea might be just to make sure that it's the same height as the panels next to it, so that where that split is, that they reach the same point when they're stood next to each other. It's not a crucial thing, but it's just a little aesthetic detail that might make it look a little bit cleaner at the end. Once you've figured out that point, pin it in place and then sew it there. We'll leave both edges of the tunnels open for now, and then we will add the straps in next. Then same as the elastic, we're going to pop the safety pin on one edge of this strap. Make sure you put it on the raw end if you have a raw end, and leave the nice clear end out there. Then from the front center, we're going to thread this in through here and out to the edge. Once you've got it to that point, pull it so that it's nice and flush with the edge, and then sew that in place so it's nice and secure and that the end of that tunnel is all closed. So exciting, it's starting to form into what looks like more like a little boob tube top now. So now that we've got those 2 straps in there, you can bunch it up and tie it up at the front. That's looking so cute. So next we are going to add on the elastic strap section, which will help secure this in place and make sure that it sits there nice and snug. But then we'll also create a frame for us to then add these sleeves onto. So once again, let's grab our measuring tape and we'll grab some points of references for when we cut out the elastic and the fabric to go over the top of it. Throw the measuring tape over our shoulders down to the point where we would like the strap to finish, or even if you want to throw this top on and kind of figure out where that's going to be sitting, that's a good option as well. For me, I've got this top on so I can use that as a reference. So I'm just going to go over my shoulder and measure from point to point where the straps will finish. For me, that is 16 inches, and then I'm going to add an inch for seam allowance. So 17 inches is going to be the cutting length of my elastic. So write that down for you. It is that measurement over your shoulder plus 1 inch. And then for the material to go over the top of that elastic, I'm going to again do a bunched up effect. So we need to add on extra material. So if my cutting length of the elastic is 17, and I'm going to add 10 inches so it has a really nice bunched up effect. Again, if you don't want much extra, just add a couple of inches. If you want heaps, then obviously add like 15 inches. My cutting length will end up being 27 inches. To figure out the width of the material going over the top, grab your elastic. I'm using a quite thick one, so I at least know the material needs to go over this. Mine is about 1.5 inches, so I'm just going to measure it 2 inches just to be safe. I'm going to double that as we'll be folding the material over the top and then adding an inch for seam allowance. So all up, my cutting width is 5 inches. So whatever this is, double it and then add an extra inch for seam allowance. Once we've cut out those 2 rectangles for this strap section, we're then going to fold them so that the good sides are facing out. I know that's a little bit different compared to what we normally do, but just keep that in mind to make sure that the good edges are facing out, and then sew down that raw edge. Once we do that for both bits, we can then pop a safety pin on the edge of the elastic and push it through until it comes out the other end of this tunnel section. Secure it in place as well as the other end, and then we'll just sew 1 line at each end to make sure that we hold these in place safely and that we can then create this nice bunched up effect. Now that we've got the 2 straps ready to go, it is time to attach them onto the top. We'll then align these straps to the edges that will then create the armhole. So it might be a good time to pin these in place and then try it on just to make sure that the strap is sitting at an ideal tension. Obviously, if it's too loose, you might need to push some more under there. If it's too tight, then maybe just make any adjustments to make that fit better. Then once you've found that ideal spot, sew that in place and secure it on the top section. So then what you should have is kind of like a little cami style looking top with the straps and the bust section. Now that those straps are added on there, that creates an armhole for us to then use as a reference to then measure to figure out how much fabric we need to cut for the sleeves. Grab your measuring tape, start down at that bottom point, and just keep pulling your measuring tape all the way around, making sure that you stretch the fabric so it's flat. Obviously we've bunched it up, but we want it to sit flush on the fabric. So keep going around that armhole section, measuring how wide the sleeves will need to be to cut. Once you've found that amount, add 3 inches just to be safe, and that will be our cutting width of the sleeve. Then you'll need to grab your measuring tape and start at the top of your shoulder and then measure down to where you want it to finish. I want mine to be kind of a longer length, so I've measured just before my wrist. So again, once you've figured out that length from your shoulder down to that point, yours could be short like this if you want. We'll then add 2 inches onto that length, and that will be our cutting length for the sleeve. Grab your material, and we'll then cut out 2 rectangles at those measurements we just found. When sewing this, we want the good sides of the straps and the good sides of the sleeves to face. So what that ends up looking like is that most of your sleeve is actually sitting on top of your garment and it's wrapping around that armhole. Once you're happy with the placement of that, just go around the edge, pin it in place. I normally start the pinning and the sewing at the underarm section and go from there. Once that's pinned, it's time to sew. Once that's sewn down, you can even flip it around and give it a little test to make sure it's all looking how you want it to. Then flip it back so that the good sides are facing and that you can see all the raw edges. We'll then push all the garment into the area of the sleeve. Keep the good sides of the sleeve facing, and you'll see that there's that open edge that we then need to sew closed, which will be the underarm section here. Pin that again in place, sew that straight line, and finish about 3 inches from there. My sleeve was quite oversized at the bottom section, so I did end up angling that sewing line, so it ends up being not as large down the bottom, so therefore it's not too oversized. So that might be a good thing to try on and make any adjustments if you need be as well. But essentially, once we've done both the sleeves, this is where we should end up with this cute little top. Once we're happy with that, we're then going to do the final touches, which is from this point that we have left open, so it folds back like that on the sleeve at this seam here. We're going to do a few lines of shirring, and that will help bunch it in here and create a kind of puffy sleeve but fitted down at the wrist or the lower section. But before we do that, we're just going to clean these outer edges. Just do a double fold all the way around this, anywhere there's raw edges showing on the end of this sleeve, which includes into this little split section there. So once we do that, we'll then meet and then add those shirring lines in there. So now that these bottom edges of the sleeve have all been hemmed and sewn in place, I've switched the bobbin to the shirring thread, and then I'm just going to sew some lines starting from where that split is and working my way across and away from it. I'll probably do about 4 lines there and then repeat that on the other sleeve. With the shirring all done on the sleeves, we are now done with the top section. So that's how it should end up looking down there around the wrist area. And we are up to one of the final steps, which is attaching this top now onto the skirt. The easiest way I find to do this is flip this shirt section inside out, grab the skirt section and kind of insert it from the inside of that shirt. So what you'll end up looking at is the circle section of the skirt and the circle section of the top, and you can just align those 2 edges, and the good side should be facing of each of those. Ideally start at one seam, make sure that they're matching and pin that in place. Jump straight over to the other side seam and align that. If you have a preferred front and back side of this to match, make sure that you have the front side of the skirt and the front side of the top matching. Then once you've got those 2 seams aligned, just keep stretching it out and matching the sections as you go. As they're both gathered sections, one might be a little bit larger than the other. Just keep adjusting, and if you need to bunch up sections to make it fit, that's all good. Just keep pinning around there, do your one circle around there of sewing, and then we literally have a dress all done. You'll just need to go through and make any final adjustments. So like if you need to hem the bottom or go through and overlock any inner sides or just trim some extra pieces off, then you will have a finished dress. I hope you enjoyed following along this tutorial, and if you did try it out, please tag me at the Essentials Club, as I always love seeing your outcomes. I'm going to do these final little touch-ups and joining the top and the bottom together, and then I will show you it in action. It's coming up to the festive season, and I think this is going to be my go-to for all the celebrations coming up. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are, and thank you so much for tuning in.